from an equal endgame to a perfect score. Hello, I'm Grandmaster Denes Boros, and it's time for us to revisit the critical game for Wesley So. Now, as you might have seen, this is a position where it's roughly balanced. He was playing against Liang Wonder, who actually put lots of pressure on him. In fact, his last move was a mistake, that is Liang Wonder's. If he would have been a little bit precise, he could have held draw here. However, the last move that Liang played was Queen e5, Queen e5 over here instead of taking, and gave Wesley the opportunity to come up with a different idea. So here White has a choice. He can decide to take on e5 or take on d5. That is the big question, which way to go. And as you might have guessed it, Wesley tries his utmost to get the full point. So if you thought that queen takes d5 is the choice, you were correct. He is making sure that there's as many pieces on the board as possible. Queen takes e5 would have actually led to a draw, because after knight e5, rook takes d5, rook f5, knight takes f4, even though an elegant little combination, after rook f4 rook takes h4, it boils down to a drawn endgame. But Wesley's choice of queen d5 is good for plenty of reasons. One of the reasons is that it actually keeps pieces on the board and some threats as well. Notice this king on g8 is a little bit awkward. No wonder queen d5 was played, rook takes d5. Still, you can't push the pawn because there's rook d8 check and rook takes f8. Rook f6, a nice little move by Liang, making sure there's a pathway out of there. But again, Wesley comes up with the best defensive idea with knight g5. If f3 were to be played, then there's knight takes f3, rook takes f3, rook g5 check, and Wesley would already be up a pawn, and there's some good winning chances there. Now Liang does not fall for that one, plays h6 instead. Knight f3, knight e3. And even though this position looks very even, Wesley is going to work this. He has 10 minutes versus 2 minutes, and he will pose as much problem as possibly can. First off, the threat that black has is to bring this king up and be active. So Wesley plays rook d7 first, make sure that doesn't happen or doesn't happen immediately. Rook f7, d4, just eyeing the weakness that's on f4. King g7, king d2, bringing the king. Rook f8, h5. So one of the things that you do, and what Wesley does best, is keeping the tension and finding targets in the position. Now he found a target on h6 and one on f4. However, it's kind of difficult to get around those, so he will have to make and create a second front. Now Liang played rook f5, trying to put pressure, c4, trying to create another front and trying to create a pass pawn where has a majority, that is Wesley. b5, b3, keeping the pressure and keeping the tension, which is always very important when you're trying to win an endgame. bc, bc, knight f1 check, king d3, knight g3, rook d7 check, again asking where is your king going. If your king goes to f6, then you actually give me some extra time to win the a6 pawn. Or you go block it with that rook f7. That's what he did, that is Liang. Although king f8 probably would have been the best, keeping this stronghold and the fifth rank under check with the rook. Rook f7, rook d6. And that's actually the big point of Wesley's play. He's just trying to misplace black's pieces. He's not actually hoping to exchange any of them. Rook e7, which I think is an inaccuracy. Here already, rook f6 would have been a better idea, just asking Wesley, what are you going to do about this if I keep attacking your rook? Rook e7, rook g6 check. Notice how Wesley keeps on asking questions, and it's getting harder and harder for Liang to respond. If the king would go to h7, then it would be sort of cut off from the main fight of the board, that is the c pawn, and it would be also beat a little bit misplaced on h7. So he plays king f7, which is a good choice. King d4 takes, rook takes a6. So here, let's take to count what happened so far. Well, Wesley created two passed pawns. His king is way more active than Liang's, and these pawns are sort of far away from promoting. So already he has some good winning chances, with Liang's time ticking down around 1 minute or so, with Wesley having more than 3 minutes. Knight f6, knight e5 check, c5, h5, c6, h4, rook b6. And this is the critical moment where probably after solving lots of problems and keeping the equilibrium, Liang falters. He plays king h6, hoping for an aggressive play. However, it turns out knight e8, the passive defense, would have been better. Now, king d5 is a logical move, bringing the king closer. h3, rook b3, just trying to stop the pawn from promoting. h2, rook h3, and seemingly this pawn is falling. However, probably what Liang missed, that there is this fantastic resource of knight f6 check, king d6, rook takes c5, king takes c5, f3, which deserves lots of exclamation marks because it says, hey, you've got a rook, but you ain't gonna stop me from queening. And even after c7, f2, queens, white queens first, yet this position is still around even, as there is no breaking through in this position for white, unbelievably enough. Even though both kings are a little bit funky and white is the one who gives the checks and some threats, it's still not enough. Even though rook b3, rook b7 would be great and would be fantastic, however, this queen on f1 is actually doing a good job defending that knight on f6 and attacking that rook on h3. Now, obviously white is not worse, but it is very difficult to imagine this, especially in big time trouble, this being fine for black. f3, but c7 isn't really the most dangerous thing in this position. It is the fact that there is knight g4, king f4 takes king g3, and seemingly this pawn is unstoppable, only a couple of moves away from promoting. But miraculously, white has this move of knight f1 check, knight d2, and the knight comes back in time to c8 before promotion. King f4, knight c4, pawn can't promote, c7, knight b6, king e5, king f7, king d6, and unbelievably enough, king is just in time to stop this king from actually promoting the c-pawn, because after king c6, knight c8, king b7, king d7, and this king is just at the right place defending the knight, so this knight can give itself up for a pawn and then win the c-pawn. However, white can just dilly-dally a little bit, because black is basically stuck over here. a4, here, here, knight a7, here, here. And unbelievably enough, knight a7 is the drawing move, king b7, king d7, takes, and we are reaching move 42-43, let's say after a6, king c8, and this is a well-known drawn position. And this is exactly 20 moves after knight e8. Now imagine being down to seconds and having to calculate a position 20 moves deep just to survive. Now that is a big challenge. For human reasons, that actually didn't happen. And after there, king f7, rook h3, c5, knight e8, king d5. He did not go and play knight e8. Instead, he played king h6. But this turned out to be a decisive mistake. Now, Wesley's move is just as good, But there was a spectacular move here, and that is knight g4 check. You cannot take the knight because c7 check and there's promotion. And if you just move the king, there's knight takes f6 with the same idea of going c7 and queens. However, Wesley's choice of knight d7 was just as good because you can't quite take that knight because that would lead into a check and a promotion. Now, knight d7 happened, h3 was played in desperation, but after knight f6, h2, knight g4 check wins the pawn, and with a piece up, this is completely winning for Wesley So. So what we kind of learned from this game is the following. Even if the position is equal, if you can keep the tension on and put some pressure on your opponent's clock, there is a good chance to get a winning position or get close to winning. So I hope you enjoyed this lecture, and if you have any questions, just put down the comments below. So thank you so much again for watching, and hope to see you guys next time. Bye bye.